Welcome to Meeting of the Minds, the interview discussion show that explores topics in the atheism-theism landscape in a civil and respectful manner. I'm pleased to have with me for my second show today, Eric, a self-proclaimed atheist Satanist. We're going to discuss a bunch of topics today, trying to explore his worldview. But before we do, I have a couple of announcements. Once again, for those of you that didn't get a chance to check out my show earlier today, for those of you that are interested in joining the discussion, there is a Meeting of the Minds Facebook page that I would like to direct you towards, as well as a YouTube channel where you can check all of this out. Two YouTube channels, actually. There is the New Covenant Group YouTube channel that I recommend that you go search for, as well as my own personal channel, and that is Maute Man. That is Mauteman. I recommend that you search for that so that you can get promos and extra little bits like my post-show wrap-ups, as well as the mirrored episodes of the show as they are uploaded to the New Covenant Group's YouTube channel. This is the last weekend where I'm going to be doing 2 shows per weekend. After this weekend, I will be on at 5 o'clock Eastern, that is 4 o'clock Central from here on in. I also wanted everyone to know that I have another Rogue Meeting of the Minds episode this coming Tuesday, and that's going to be at 8 o'clock Central, 9 o'clock Eastern, with the host of A Rebel's Cause Radio, Mr. Dan Fry. So I was on their show this past Thursday, and now he's reciprocating and being on my show, and I'm looking forward to a really nice discussion with him. So that's the housekeeping part of today's show, and I have with me as my guest Eric. How you doing today, Eric?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing real well. That was a mouthful of introductory stuff to get out of the way, but we're not done, because as with all of the shows, I have some introductory questions to get a feel for where you stand on a couple of things, and you are unique, I must say, in that I've had theists on the show, I've had atheists on the show, I have not had an atheist Satanist on the show. So some of the questions I'm going to ask you are the same as the questions that I have asked other atheists, but I have a feeling that some of your answers are going to be a little bit different. And so let's see just how different these answers are to my questions. So here we go. First question: how would you identify yourself, and how would you describe your worldview?
Well, I'm a person that does not like labels, so I identify myself as me. I use this label as something that comes closest. You can't walk up to somebody and go, "Hi," and they go, "What are you about?" And I'm me. That doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, identifying as a Satanist is the closest thing that I've come to a philosophy, but I don't take it as a dogmatic view. It's not LaVeyan Satanism or theistic Satanism. It's just my own worldview, if that makes sense. I take what I can from different philosophies and apply them to me, how I see them.
Okay. So to help me make sense of it, could you please describe that worldview as far as things that you accept and don't accept?
As far as, can you give me something specific? Or
Okay. Well, maybe some of the questions that I'm going to ask in this introductory part will help parse that out. So, how about this? Did Jesus exist?
Probably not in the way that he's described in the New Testament. I don't know, and it actually doesn't matter to me. What I do is look at what it says and try to distill it down to its purest form.
Okay.
And to
what does that mean to you? So my question is really a little bit more pragmatic. So
Okay.
whether or not Jesus was the Son of God, do you think that there was a human being that walked the earth by the name of Jesus?
It's possible.
Okay. All right. And when you say you try to distill it to its essence, are you referring to the teachings of the Gospels?
Yeah, the synoptic gospels. To me, when I look at it in the Greek storytelling and writing tradition, I take it purely as metaphor. And to me, it means don't be a jerk to other people. Try to be treated as you want to be treated. And when he says things like "you can become like me," that means you can think for yourself. It's not a
Hmm.
dogmatic approach. I think people misinterpret that all the time. So, but that's just my feeling on it. So,
Great. Well, and that's what this show is all about. I very much want you and your opinions to shine. So please don't feel obligated to keep framing things as just your opinion because I'm going to assume that everything that you say is just your opinion because, I very much want to get your individual difference out there into the general public so that people can't pigeonhole you or use straw man arguments against you or anything like that. So I very much want your individual perspective to shine for the next 45 minutes, okay?
sounds good. I will
All
not
right.
qualify the questions with that anymore. So,
Oh no, no. I just because all of these questions can be qualified with that just for the sake of discussion. Don't bother. Just accept that. I accept your individual differences. So, do you accept anything supernatural?
uh, it depends on how you describe supernatural. I don't like the word supernatural because something
Okay.
we discover tomorrow would become natural. If you're talking in terms of how people usually describe supernatural, no, I don't.
Okay. Yeah, and that's how I would use it because it almost seems like I've seen people use the term extra natural. And that almost obviates the term supernatural. And it almost seems like something other than natural that could eventually be subsumed under the natural, I would consider extra natural. But supernatural is something above and beyond what is natural. And I think that's kind of what you were disagreeing with. Is that fair to
Yeah,
say?
yeah, things that we don't know or don't understand are usually put under the category supernatural, but it's something that
Okay.
we might eventually come to understand, in which case it would be natural. So,
All right. So you've already touched on this a little bit with the New Testament and the Gospels, but in general, what is your opinion of the Bible?
for the most part, I think it's an evil, vile book, or set of books, I should say, that hold no historical merit, no moral merit whatsoever.
Okay. And what led you to your current beliefs? Not necessarily of the Bible, but your general worldview and disposition. Your label of you as you and the way that you use the term Satanist.
What led me thinking, a lot of thinking, a lot of reading, questioning things, trying to look at things in different ways instead of just a linear approach. The way that I like to think of learning is a ladder instead of just a straight line. I would rather
Okay.
learn something incorrectly and then have to relearn it than not learn at all.
Okay, so I like that. So you embrace the making mistakes approach because you'll learn from those mistakes. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, I think people today are too afraid to make mistakes and admit when they have made mistakes. And I don't understand that whatsoever.
Hmm. Okay. And in your journey to where you are now, um, were you ever what you would call a theist?
No, not in a traditional sense. No. I have some ideas on what might be out there, but those are really just kind of vague feelings. They're not really anything that is a concrete assessment of what could be beyond. So,
Okay. Now, so you made it through the introductory questions, and I really appreciate your honesty with answering them. And now we're into the discussion part. Now, I did not give myself any notes for you today because I really want to fly by the seat of my pants and get to know you in a genuine way. And before we get started, I do want to give a shout out to the person that introduced us, and that is somebody who goes by the handle of 13 Heathens. And so if he is watching, I just want to say, what's up, 13 Heathens? How you doing? And thank you very much for bringing Eric and I together so that we can have this awesome discussion. And so when we first talked, it was on I think it was a Google Plus Hangout, or it was a Skype Hangout, or it was some kind of Hangout.
mm-hmm.
And there were several of us. And you and I had a very basic conversation. And you had mentioned, and I asked you like a super basic question about if you could describe your position, and you mentioned, and you quoted something from the Satanic Bible.
Yes.
Do you remember that? Okay.
Yes, I do.
Would you mind re-quoting that, or do you remember which quote you read?
I think I was reading. Hold on for just a second. Let me pull it up.
Okay.
It's easier than getting the actual book out, so.
Mm-hmm.
So you can ask me something in the meantime while I look this up. So.
Okay. So while you're looking that up, and while you're looking that up, I understand that there is a drinking game going on amongst viewers about how many times I use the phrase "bust your chops." So
Okay.
I want to try to say that as frequently as possible so that the people that are drinking, every time I say bust your chops, get a nice buzz on by the time the show is done. So bust your chops, bust your chops, bust your chops, bust your chops. I just wanted to get that out of my system.
That'll get them started.
Yeah, that'll get them. I mean, that's good, 4 shots right there, right? So long as they're not wimping out and just taking sips of beer, right? But I did want to bust your chops because after you read the quote, I had something to say about the Satanic Bible, and I'm not challenging you, so to speak, on.
Oh, you're not challenging me because I don't hold it as doctrine. It's just
exactly
part of it I agree with,
that's
part
what
of it
you
I
said.
don't. So.
Mm-hmm. But it was interesting, and I thought that it was revealing because. Once you find the passage that you read, I want to springboard off of that into a couple more questions. Have you been able to find it?
Yeah, I think when we talked before, we were talking about the 9 Satanic statements.
Yes. Could you please read them?
Sure. Satan represents indulgence instead of abstinence. Satan represents vital existence instead of spiritual pipe dreams. Satan represents undefiled wisdom instead of hypocritical self-deceit. Satan represents kindness to those who deserve it instead of love wasted on ingrates, which is actually one I don't particularly agree with, but
okay.
Satan represents vengeance instead of turning the other cheek. Satan represents responsibility to the responsible instead of concern for psychic vampires. And again, that's just a metaphorical tool for explaining people that suck your energy, people that try to take your time from you, that kind of thing. Satan represents man as just another animal, sometimes better, more often worse than those that walk on all fours, who because of his divine spiritual intellectual development has become the most vicious animal of them all. 8. Satan represents all of the so-called sins as they lead to physical, mental, or emotional gratification. And the last one, Satan has been the best friend the church has ever had as he has kept it in business all of these years.
Okay. Now, After you read those to me, I did bust your chops because after having read them, I mentioned something about the fact that Anton Szandor LaVey spent, like 200 pages essentially saying what any articulate 18-year-old would say. But your response to that was, oh, that's fine and well because I don't really hold on to these 9 premises dogmatically. Does that sound about right?
Exactly.
Okay. And you admitted as you were reading them, some of them resonate with you more so than others.
Yeah, some of them actually don't resonate with me at all. I would be, again, with the labels, but I would be what would be termed independent Satanist. Just think for myself. I don't follow any particular dogma, so...
Great, and I'm glad that you said that. And I also want to make it explicit that even though you're calling yourself a Satanist, you are not a proponent or representative of the Church of Satan.
No, I actually find the Church of Satan kind of silly.
Okay, cool. So for those of you that, for any reason at all, would equate Satanist or you with the Church of Satan or Anton Szandor LaVey, even though you did just get done reading the 9 tenets of Satanism, that's not the case. That's just a very loose framework for...
It's more for the audience than it is for us.
Excellent, excellent. So my question is, what would prevent you, because the things that, the 9 tenets, aside from the ones that are just like so far out there that you totally disagree with them, they sound like ideas that any free thinker would abide by. Except for, let me riff off of this for a second. Except for like the second to last one, which had to do with a judgment about humans. So I want to get your opinion about that. Humans, are they naturally good or bad, in your opinion?
It depends on the human. I think for the most part, people are altruistic and want to help people.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah, because just the way that it was framed in one of those tenets, it made it sound like humankind in general is kind of bad or evil. But you know, I appreciate you adding that nuance. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say the way I interpret that, and this is how I take anything, I always try to interpret it for myself. It's basically saying, don't forget that we are just another animal on this earth, and we have evolved to our niche just like any other animal has. But I think a lot of people tend to think that humans are somehow above other animals when that's not necessarily true. We are smarter, but we don't have claws, we don't have big teeth, that kind of... do you know what I mean?
Yes. Now, I happen to believe in human exceptionalism. So, I mean, even though I do believe that we are on a continuum of animals, I do, and it's irrational, and I'll be the first to admit it, I believe that there is an argument for human exceptionalism. Otherwise, you know, if I were philosophically consistent, I'd be a vegetarian.
Right.
So, I mean, that you know, that's a little bit off topic because that doesn't really have to do with your worldview or this or that. But
that's okay.
As far as like humans go, as humans as animals go, or non-human animals, I do think there is room for an argument that, you know, human exceptionalism. There is an argument for that, but like I said, that's a little tangential. So, like I said, the tenets kind of seem like anything that a good, rational, free thinker would abide by. So, my question is, what prevents you from just labeling yourself as a free thinker?
I think that anybody that is actually a free thinker does not need to use that label. Because once you label yourself a free thinker, you're not actually thinking freely.
So is it the dogma of labels that prevents you from using such labels?
Yeah, I'm really not a label person. They're definitionally useful,
Hmm.
but you always get pigeonholed into
Gotcha.
this or that. It's
Hmm.
always some kind of binary set thinking, which I just do not subscribe to.
Okay. I appreciate your desire for autonomy because that's kind of what I'm getting from you is like your desire to be free and autonomous of other people's desire to strawman, pigeonhole, or apply labels based on their fixed way of thinking that
Exactly.
may be totally inappropriate for you as a human.
Well, it's totally inappropriate for any human being. Everybody should
Sure.
feel free to express themselves the way that they want as long as they're not hurting someone else or trying to force someone else into believing something that they don't want to believe.
Hmm. Now, the one component about your lifestyle that I did want to address without getting personal is the fact that you did admit that there are some ritualistic components of your personal life, but that I'm not going to get into because it's none of my business. But I did want to address the fact that there are rituals that you
Yes,
do engage in that also tie into maybe the fact that you call yourself a Satanist. Is that fair?
that is fair.
Okay, so maybe that is a piece of the puzzle that the people that are watching or listening can um, can pull into their understanding of why you would use that label. So it's not
Sure.
just a philosophy; it is also it's not just a cognitive, but it's also a behavioral component via
Yeah.
rituals. And like I said, those rituals are absolutely none of my business, and they're nobody else's business. So moving on from that,
Well, if you want
um,
to, I can explain the psychology behind it a little bit more
that would be
without going into
fantastic.
detail.
Go ahead.
Um, how I interpret it and how I use ritual is think of meditation, but at a deeper level.
Okay.
What you're trying to do is clear your mind of everything and trying to get rid of any programming or dogma that has been put into your brain by other people and trying to
Hmm.
rebuild yourself back up. And um, it's kind of hard to explain without getting into specifics, but it's just a way of self programming. And that sounds bad when you first hear it, but it's actually a really useful thing
It actually makes
to.
sense. Is it okay if I relabel it? And I know you don't like labels, but if I reframe it as it sounds like you need to deconstruct to reconstruct.
Exactly.
Okay, and it sounds like a mental version of that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that doesn't sound bad to me at all. I mean, sure, if you apply the term reprogramming, it certainly does sound a little nefarious, but
Exactly.
um, I mean, as far as meditation goes, I mean, I don't see that as a negative thing. So yeah, without going into the detail, I appreciate you going into that and being honest about that. That's great.
That's what
So
you're gonna
is
get from me is honesty, like always. Sometimes brutally.
excellent.
So
And so I'm gonna ask you questions, and feel free to let me know if you don't want to answer them. So as far as this ritual goes, is it something that you engage in on a weekly basis, a daily basis, a monthly basis, or whenever you feel that you need to be deconstructed and reconstructed? Is it a feel basis, or is it a structured thing?
it's not structured as in I need to do this at 8 o'clock at night. But I do try to do this every day, just because talking to people and getting different views, trying to pull what you can from what other people have said, I just find it useful to try and do it every day.
Okay. And with any kind of meditation, I feel, because I have engaged in meditation myself, it's really about maintaining a feeling of centeredness. Is that an accurate way of describing your goal?
Um, it's a little bit more chaotic than that for me. It's not just sitting down in a dark room and humming to myself. Um, it's so hard to explain. Yeah, it's more chaotic than that. Just I'm trying to think of a good way to describe it without going into specifics, but just really letting your mind wander while you do something else, which is close to meditation, but the way that I do it is definitely more chaotic than what most people would consider
Okay.
meditation or going into oneself. So,
Okay. So, um, when it comes to the ritual, and when it comes to the label of Satanist as you apply it to yourself, um, how many years did it develop into what it is now? Like, when did this journey start for you?
when I was born, I've always
Oh, okay.
been the odd one out. I've always been the one that's been sitting in a corner thinking about things. When I was going through school and high school, I never really had a lot of friends, so I had to find a way to figure out what was going on without feeling sorry for myself.
Okay.
And that
And
was just the way that I have always thought.
And now that you're an adult and the internet is what it is, do you find solace in um, meeting people, like-minded people, in forums and things like that? Because I mean, I believe that you do a lot of like hangouts and video chats and things like that. You do them a little bit more than me, I think.
Probably a lot more. But what I'm usually looking for is a discussion with someone. It doesn't matter what their philosophy is or even what religion they are. If you're willing to sit down and have an actual discussion where we listen to each other and talk to
Hmm.
each other, those are the
Hmm.
conversations that I look for, not the debates and the arguing back and forth and talking at each other and talking over each other. That doesn't interest me at all.
Okay. So I'm curious to get your opinion as an atheist. How do you feel about the way that the atheist movement, and right now I'm using air quotes, the atheist movement has progressed over the past decade or so? Considering the new atheist movement has kind of come to fruition, and I kind of see the fruits of the atheist movement bearing essentially um, militant atheism, and I kind of see that waning a little bit. That's my own personal opinion. I'm curious to get your take on that whole movement.
Well, again, dogmatic thinking is very prevalent in the atheist community, and sometimes it doesn't anger me, but it saddens me that people go around saying, "Well, I'm such a rational thinker," or "I'm such a free thinker," when they're not really doing any thinking. They're just parroting lines that they've heard from somebody else, say Hitchens or Dawkins, or saying things like science
Hmm.
has solved everything. Well, we don't
Well,
have all the information yet. I mean, it's a useful tool, but
hmm.
it's not the be all end all because we will never have all the information. And I'm
Exactly.
not dissing
Exactly.
science. I love
And
science to death.
I also see people like mimicking the attitude of the Four Horsemen without having the bona fides to back it up.
Yes, that happens a lot. I see it in discussions all the time where it's the same person using the same three arguments and not coming up with their own thoughts on anything. And it's just sad.
Hmm. In fact, I was recently on a Rebels Cause radio, and I said something, and now this might get me in trouble with the atheists, but oh, I just got reminded that I need to say bus chops, bus chops, bus chops, bus chops. For those of you that are thirsty. Um, I lost my train of thought. Oh, the thing that's going to get me in trouble is I almost prefer the militant theists because I almost feel that at least they're striving to be Christ-like, even though they're misguided, whereas the militant atheists are striving to be like Dawkins. They're striving to be like Hitchens. They're essentially striving to be like arrogance. You know what I mean? Like, so in other words, their goal is to be like an arrogant person that can back up what they're saying, and when they fall short, they get the arrogance right, they just don't have the backing it up right. Whereas a militant theist, even though their process is a little askew, their content at least is, based in something that can be grounded in something that could be used for good. Does that kind of make sense? I might not be articulating that well, but I mean, it's more of a gripe within the atheist community because, and I especially see it among not new atheists as in the new atheist movement, but new atheists as in newbies that go onto the forums and just start blasting vitriol.
Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with a lot of the people that you see doing that are usually recent deconverts, and they're still angry, very angry that they had been, maybe misled or lied to or whatever it is in their mind that is still keeping them angry. And they're using the same thinking and principles that they would have used from one set of dogma to the other set. So it's really not anything different for them. It's just...
Well, that brings me to another question. Do you think that the people that are militant atheists now, that are apostates, do you think they had that same fervor as theists?
Most likely. Jerks are jerks. It doesn't matter what you believe in or don't believe in.
Well said, man. You articulated that perfectly, and you landed it. That was great. So let's get started on some of the conclusion questions, because unless you have some questions for me, I think that you handled yourself perfectly during this discussion section.
Well, thank you.
No doubt, man. So these questions, I kind of consider them similar to a lightning round. So you can feel free to be as pithy as you want, unless, of course, you feel that you would like to expand on some of the answers that you give. So let's start with the basics.
Sure.
Would the world be better off without theists?
No.
All right, you were hesitant about that.
No, I wasn't hesitant. I was just trying to frame the question in my mind. I think the world would be better off if people actually thought about what they believed in instead of taking instructions from someone else.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Say a pastor or a preacher or somebody that's instructing them how to live.
Okay. I actually have an audience member question that Skyped it in.
Sure.
Do you find many within the atheist community to be dismissive of the notion of spirituality on a personal level?
Yes, I do. And I personally get crap about it all the time. I've been called not a real atheist because I believe in some spiritual things. And I don't pretend to speak for anyone else, so I don't know why people are pretending to speak for me. Do you know what I mean?
So, yeah, so somebody out there has an atheistometer.
I guess so. I,
Okay, I didn't know that they existed. I didn't realize that there was a metric upon which to judge somebody's atheism um, just because they believe something that somebody else doesn't believe. So that's interesting to me that they would lob that against you. And there's a
well,
second
you
part to this. Go ahead.
sure. No, I was just gonna say you hear that all the time, though, from especially the militant anti-theists. Is everything spiritual is all nonsense, and then it ends there. No explanation. Just it's just all nonsense, and that's the end of it. It's like
Hmm.
okay,
But they're
nothing
not being
to
dogmatic.
expand upon.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a wonderful chunk of dogma right there. The second part to that question is, do you think that do you find theists to be dismissive of anything spiritual outside of their own theology?
Usually, yes. Again, it depends on the individual person. But for the most part, especially fundamental sects of any religion, obviously they're going to be completely dismissive of anything that doesn't agree with their particular brand of theology.
Okay. Getting back to some of the concluding questions, what evidence would disprove your worldview, your atheistic, loosely Satanistic worldview?
I don't think you could disprove my worldview because it's so like it's me, you know, unless the stars parted, the
Keep
clouds
going.
parted, and one of the many different gods showed their face and said, I'm this, and you must worship me. But then again, I always think, well, if that happened, how would we know that that entity or being wasn't lying to us? So it's kind of tricky.
I see. So, yeah, it sounded like you were really going for like the outer reaches, like if the stars were pulled aside like a curtain and Jesus and Vishnu walked hand in hand and woke you up in the middle of the matrix, would that then convince you that everything that you believed was not true?
I don't know because if that happened, how would you know it's not a hallucination? You're going to such philosophical ramifications
Jumping through.
here that we could
Yeah.
spend, a day talking about this. So,
Hmm. Absolutely.
but
So here's a question for you. What
sure,
question would you most want to be asked by a theist?
can we have a discussion?
Okay. And I'm assuming the answer to that would be,
Yes.
all right. What question would you least want to be asked by a theist?
What question would I least want to be asked by a theist? Why don't you repent? I always hate that one. Repent from
Okay.
what?
That's nice. Um, and here's one. Let's say you got to pick the smartest or wisest person that you can come up with as a representative of humanity to answer this simple question: does God exist? What field of study should that person be predominantly known for?
I don't know if they have to be in a particular field of study. I would pick someone like Lao Tzu or Siddhartha. just
Okay.
because of their unique, regardless whether or not they actually existed. Um, just that brand of philosophy seems like they're actually taking the questions in and contemplating on them for a long time instead of jumping the gun and saying, oh, it's this or it's this. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
What's Oh yeah, yeah. I like that answer. That nobody's ever given them as a response to that question yet. So I appreciate you diversifying that answer. What's the worst argument that you've heard against your position?
You are lying because you believe in Satan.
People really lob
That's
that
a neat
against you?
little tautology right there, isn't it?
And here's one that might require a little bit of thought. What's the best argument you've heard against your position?
Um, Pretty much along the lines of what you had said before. Why adopt that particular label and just call yourself, a free thinker or atheist or whatever? But there's some things, like I said before, that I don't specifically adhere to, but there's some ideas about what's going on in the universe and maybe beyond that I have that are my own, and I don't take them as a concrete I have it figured out, but I'm always looking to try to figure it out for myself.
Okay.
And I'm not going to ever tell anybody else, hey, I figured this out, you need to believe like I do. I never find that useful. So
Okay. How do you find meaning in a universe devoid of a prime mover?
it's easy. We have our family, we have our friends, we have other people. It's not difficult. That question has always disturbed me because it seems like, well, if you don't have this deity or existence in your life, then you're worthless or you're not able to, you know, the tried and true. Well, you don't have anything to live for, so why even bother? It's like, don't you have friends and family that you love very much? I always find that question very funny. Not because you brought it up, but you hear it
Hmm.
so often, and it's such a silly, silly argument.
Okay. And finally, are babies born atheists?
Um, Maybe atheistic, but I don't think atheist. No, because as far as I understand it, they look up to their mom, dad, and family as a almost a god. So I mean, it's something that gives you everything you need.
Hmm.
But in terms of theology, um, I don't know. I'm not really qualified to answer that question, but I would say atheistic, but definitely not atheist.
Okay.
I might
Excellent.
be splitting hairs with that answer, but
No, I like splitting hairs, man. That's like I said, I want you and your opinions to shine today. So, speaking of which, I think that you did a great job answering my questions and adding nuance and being honest. And
you
that's going to wrap it up for today's show. I just want to remind everybody who is watching and listening that I'm going to do a wrap up post show and post it to my YouTube channel. And for those of you that are playing the drinking game, bus chops, bus chops, bus chops, bus chops. So there's a couple more shots for you at the very end. I want to thank everybody for checking this out and remind you all that the new slot is next week at 4 o'clock Central, 5 o'clock Eastern. And my guest next week will be Paul Taylor from Creation Today Ministries, made popular by Eric Hovind and his father Kent Hovind. And I will be talking to Paul about his new book, Don't Miss the Boat, which has to do with the Noahic flood. And also this Tuesday, I'm going to be talking to Dan Fry from A Rebel's Cause Radio on a rogue episode of Meeting of the Minds. And that's going to be simultaneously streamed on my YouTube channel. That's Maute Man, Mauteman, as well as right here on the New Covenant Group's Ustream channel. So if you're watching this right now, please tune into this very channel on Tuesday night at 8 o'clock Central. And that having been said, thank you once again, Eric, for your time, and I will see everybody on Tuesday.